All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am going to go ahead and get started so that I can be respectful of your time. Welcome again to Setting Badass Boundaries. I'm really excited to see where we go and how today's session can help you set better boundaries. So here is a quick overview of what we're going to dive into today. So first you're going to get to know a little bit more about who I am. I have some house rules for us to apply by. And then we're going to talk about what are boundaries. We're going to define it. We're going to get into what are the myths and the benefits of it. We're going to explore why it should matter for you and how you get curious to understand why they keep showing up and what they are trying to tell you. And last but not least, we're going to practice. So if you don't have a pen and paper already ready, make sure you go and grab one, or at least have your tablet, phone, or laptop nearby so that when we get to the practice aspect of today's session, you will be ready to go. So, hey everyone, again, my name is Erica. If this is the first time that you are joining me, welcome. If you have been here before, thank you for showing up again for this webinar. For those who don't know much about me, I'm Ohio born and raised, and I am currently living in Accra, Ghana, which is located in West Africa. Now, you may be wondering, why is an intimacy coach doing a session on boundaries? Well, that's easy. As an intimacy coach, I love to help everyday normal people, regardless of where you work, regardless of your title, of your religion, of your sexual identification. I like to help everyone deepen their emotional, and physical relationships with themselves, first and foremost, and also with the world. My belief is when we're able to show up as our most authentic selves, we're actually able to receive the most purest form of love. And when we are able to do that, we're able to offer the same grace to those around us as well. So here are our house rules. First and foremost, you're here, and that is a huge bonus on itself. So you're here. I want you to just be present as much that you can be fully in this space with me this morning or afternoon. If you can have your camera on, have your camera on. If you can't, that's okay. Feel free to use the emoji reactions there at the bottom of your screen, and the chat box is also going to be open. So feel free to drop comments into the chat as well. Now, there may be a chance that I don't see your comment. It doesn't mean that I am not scanning for it. It just may mean that I am in the middle of tracking something else. But please be present, engage. It is going to be so important as we move through today's webinar. Be respectful. We all come from different places in our life, and we all have different cultures and traditions that we adhere to. And so I want you to be able to show up as your most authentic self in this space. And one of the best ways you can do that is if there's something you want to comment on in the chat box, just make sure you start it with the "for me." Those two words are beautiful and help to reduce any offense that anyone can take from you sharing your own shared experience. You being able to share your experience today is highly important, but make sure you just start it off with the "for me, I remember when, for me, it would be better if," so that we know you are talking solely about your own lived experience. Be open-minded. When we talk about boundaries, it can really touch on some other things that maybe feel really hard and really difficult. And you may already have an idea of what you can and cannot do. The only thing I ask is that you be open today. Just be open to seeing where the journey goes. See if there's anything else new that you may be able to learn and hold on to. Let's see where that open mind will get you. Participate. The more you participate and engage in whichever format you can, the more high energy I will be able to have to deliver this webinar. So if your camera is on, thank you so much. I am pulling from your energy from being on the screen. If your camera is off, that's totally okay, and it is totally respected. Feel free to use the chat box and again, those emoji reactions so that I can see that you are completely engaged and this material is resonating with you. And last but not least, have fun. And the reason I say that is because one thing I've noticed for me, for myself, is that whenever I'm in an experience and it's full of fun, I tend to remember the material more, and I'm more likely to actually put it into practice. So as much as possible, have fun. Make this the lightest experience that you can have today, but also the most impactful. Going the wrong way. There we go. So let's talk about boundaries. But before we jump in, I want you to just go ahead and drop in the chat box on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate your overall boundaries? 1 would be, I don't think I really have any. And 10 would be, they are so strong, they're unpenetrable. So scale to 1 to 10, how would you rate your overall boundaries? An 8, an 8. Okay. Awesome. 7. So I see some boundary warriors in here. This is amazing. Okay. 7, 6. Awesome. Love it. So this means that so far, almost everyone here in this room probably has really good and strong boundaries. Now, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your personal boundaries? 1 being completely non-existent and 5 being so outstanding. So we're moving the scale down just a little, 1 to 5. A 1 is you have no boundaries whatsoever. And this is in your personal life. So this is around how people access your personal time. It can be your social setting, things like that when I say your personal boundaries. How people interact with your space, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm seeing some differences. All right, so for some strong and some not so strong. All right, what about your professional boundaries? What is your work-life balance like? Are you able to put up resistance to work, or do you find when it comes to work, you really don't show up with such strong boundaries? Okay, so on the work side, I see it's a little bit lower than maybe on the personal side for some. And that's also scaled 1 to 5. Okay, right there in the middle, more boundaries with work, really making sure people know how to use your time. Amazing. And the last question is on the romantic front, in your relationships, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your boundaries? And if you're single, don't be like, well, I'm not in a relationship. I have nothing romantic going on. I'm not rating this one. Rate why? Why are you single? On a scale of 1 to 5, when you're dating, how would you rate your boundaries? Okay. So we see that there's some strengths and there's some weaknesses. Now, the reason I asked you to think about this, and I love that there's even a 5, like they're outstanding. Absolutely love that. The reason I wanted you to pause and think about this is because it is not uncommon to have stronger boundaries in one area of your life and weaker or non-existent boundaries in another area. So today, we are going to discuss why boundaries are so important in every area of your life and how communicating our boundaries can positively impact your romantic relationships. So let's go ahead and get started. What are boundaries, right? Like, what are they really? Well, by definition, a boundary is a line that makes a limit of an area, right? It outlines an area. It lets us know where certain things are. Some boundaries we are so accustomed to that we forget they exist and we even forget the importance of them. So we have city boundaries, road boundaries, and even during COVID, we had social boundaries. And while some of these may be received by varying degrees of appreciation, they are boundaries nonetheless. Another way of thinking of a boundary is as your own personal limit. It is what makes you safe in the world, and it's what helps you stay in sustainable connection with other people. It is a limit you put in place to actually protect your well-being. I'm going to say that again. A boundary can be a limit that you put in place to protect your own well-being. Too often, we only think of our overall boundaries, and we don't think about how boundaries exist all around us, because there are so many different types of boundaries that we could be paying attention to. And this is physical boundaries, emotional, mental, spatial. Like, am I too close? Am I too far away? Like, what does it mean for somebody to be in your personal space, and how do you articulate the boundary that you may have around that? What about time? When someone comes too early or comes too late, how is that impacting you? There could be material boundaries, political, religious boundaries, and the list goes on and on and on. So I like to think of boundaries as a small token on the pathway of intimacy. And these small tokens are essentially the gifts that we give to the world. Boundaries are a gift from me to you. When you state a boundary, you are giving someone the gift. You're giving someone the tool on how to love you, on how they're able to stay in loving connection with you. Boundaries are extremely essential to maintaining connection over time. They reinforce trust and they create space for intimacy. So every time we communicate a boundary, we are literally lighting up the pathway to our hearts. And we reveal to the person on the other side what it is we need to feel safe, to feel seen, to be heard, to enjoy touch, to not feel like we're too much, to not feel like we're taking up too much space, or that our emotions are too big as well. Yet, some people see boundaries as someone being completely inflexible or way too difficult. And so sometimes when somebody articulates a boundary, they're seen as selfish. And, for example, there's that idea of like, oh, Amma, she always just wants it her way. She's totally inflexible. She just is never going to do whatever we ask her to do. And unfortunately, boundaries get a really bad rep, especially in a world where so much of our lives is on social media and so much of our lives is fluid. So there's almost this idea that people have instant access to you and your time and your money and your emotions and their unsolicited relationship advice to you. And it's seen as being totally permissible. But it shouldn't be. And here's why. There are a few just common myths around establishing boundaries that we must debunk. But before I even jump into that, I really want you to think about, how are people accessing your time? How are you allowing them to access your time? And is there a boundary breach that's even happening? The other day, I was with a friend and he was going with messages. And I was like, hey, is everything okay? What's happening over there? And he's like, oh, no, everything's all right. And I was like, are you sure? Because you seem really tense and your thumbs are moving really fast. And he was like, oh, somebody sent me a message and I didn't respond. And now they've gone and done something that they shouldn't have done. And I'm just trying to rectify it. And I was like, oh, well, when did they send you a message? Was it like a day ago? And he was like, no, it was 3 minutes ago. And I was like, wait a minute. Somebody sent you a message 3 minutes ago and they couldn't wait for you to respond. And they've already acted on something and now you feel bad. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, yo, I don't respond sometimes for like a week. It's a good thing that me and that other person are not friends, because I would disappoint them over and over and over again. But the moral of that story is, On these messaging apps, using WhatsApp, iMessage, and other tech tools of communication, are you being pressured to respond immediately? Do people think they have 24-hour access to you and your time and your mind and your response? Or should that be a boundary for you? Now, here are some common myths around boundaries. Boundaries are selfish. Boundaries are not selfish. Again, they are your way of showing the world how to love you. Setting boundaries hurts relationships. With who? If you're setting a boundary, you're doing it because you want to feel safe, because you want to have trust. So where is the hurt in that? Boundaries are a one-time fix? Usually not. Only difficult people need boundaries. Most difficult people actually have no boundaries. And the last myth that I'll share today is that boundaries mean being too rigid or completely inflexible. Again, another myth. So what are some of the benefits of having boundaries? Here are 5 of them that I want to share with you. Improved emotional and mental health. You will have increased confidence and self-esteem. And this is because you're beginning to trust yourself, and you're also beginning to trust the relationships with the people around you. You'll have enhanced productivity and focus, which can naturally lead to more time and energy for your own personal goals. And you feel that that space and time is there because everybody understands who you are and your needs the same way you can understand who they are and their needs. And then that leads to what else? Better relationships. Because again, you feel seen, you feel heard, you feel held, and you feel as if there is space for your vulnerability. You don't feel as if what you're bringing to the table can't be valued and or is too much for the person or people that you're interacting with. So what happens when a boundary is crossed? Because inevitably, our boundaries are going to be crossed. When a boundary is crossed, it leads to disconnection. It can throw us from our sense of safety and lead to feeling completely shut down. You can recognize when a boundary is crossed as it may make you feel angry, hurt, disconnected from your partner, rejected, or even resentful. When our boundaries are crossed repeatedly, we lose trust and we start to see the fractures in our intimacy. Having a boundary crossed does not feel good. It can be completely deflating. Yet the truth is, communicating a boundary is your responsibility. And there's an old saying that says, a closed mouth don't get fed, meaning if you never communicate your boundaries, you cannot expect anyone to know they exist, nor can you expect anyone to respect them. So it's really important to note that when we're talking about boundaries, and in today's conversation, it's important to note the difference of having a boundary and knowing when it's been crossed, and not when someone intentionally oversteps or violates you without consent. Those are 2 totally different things. So when we're talking about our boundaries being crossed, we're talking about, hey, I've set this boundary, I've stated it, you know about it, and yet you've crossed it. And so these are 2 different concepts. I just want to reiterate that because we're not talking about anything non-consensual in that way. So I want to make sure that's clear. Now, when it does come to boundaries, sometimes we're not even aware a boundary has been crossed until after it happens. And that too is okay. And sometimes we allow our boundaries to be crossed because we're afraid of losing someone or of offending someone. And as I mentioned at the start of this, I live in Accra, Ghana, and during the month of December is when there's a lot of social activities, and they call it Dirty December. And so a few years ago, a friend of a friend, this person, someone I did not know, a friend of a friend ended up in a really peculiar situation. And so my friend asked if this person could come and stay with me for 3 days. That means 2 nights. Okay. Like, can this person come and stay with you 3 days, 2 nights? And I said, okay, yeah, no problem. I understand that, they've ended up in a certain situation. So yes, they can come and stay with me until they're able to get things sorted. And this friend ended up staying with me for 6 days, 5 nights. That is so very different from 3 days and 2 nights. And at first, I tried to be so understanding of the person's situation. And they asked if they could stay one additional day. Of course, you can stay one additional day. Like, things are booked, it's hard to find accommodation. Like, yes, take your time today to figure out what you need to do so that you can leave. And then it became, oh, Erica, the energy of your house is just so nice and it's so welcoming. I really just don't want to go. And then it transitioned from that to, oh, your house is near all the fun things and traffic is so bad. And like, I find when I'm here, I just get everywhere so easily. And I went from understanding to being concerned to feeling used to becoming angry to just being completely disgusted. And it was because my boundary of lending a hand was being taken advantage of. So my boundary was completely crossed in this scenario. And I did eventually have the conversation with her and I asked her to leave, as I was never prepared to have an extended guest during that time. And I was actually in the process of preparing to host other guests. And so she did ask if she could stay for one more night, to which I said no. And I was very proud of me for standing in that boundary and letting her know that all the additional time I gave her had been utilized. And I use that as an example because sometimes honoring our boundaries, communicating them can be really tough and difficult. And it can seem like we're being difficult, but there has to sometimes be a consequence when somebody is overstepping a boundary, or else they'll continue to push and push and push. And they'll try to use a sympathy card in order to get you to turn your mind from holding true and steady to your boundaries. So, what are some of the signs that you may feel or experience that you need to set a boundary? Well, maybe you feel overwhelmed or burnt out. Maybe you're starting to have resentment towards somebody. Maybe you feel undervalued or taken for granted. You find it really hard to say no. You have no time to do anything for yourself because you're so busy doing so many other things for everyone else. What is self-care for you? It does not exist. You feel incredibly tense, or maybe you see your phone rings and there's a name that pops up and you cringe, or your heart races, or you become angry. What are some of the other signs, feelings, or sensations for you? Feel free to just drop them in the chat. I want to see if you're starting to notice things that may be happening in your everyday experience that indicate someone may be stepping on your boundaries. Hmm. Sometimes it can be hard to track, for sure. I feel bad if I don't let them cross my boundary. Yeah, a lot of us feel that way. Like, oh, I guess I just have to do this. It's my mom after all. And it's like, yeah, mom, like, no, you can't do that. I can't do this for you anymore. I need you to learn how to use your computer. And when my mother watches this replay, she's going to laugh so hard because that is our boundary. Do your own computer work. For me, it's hard to identify when a boundary is being crossed until it's too late. Absolutely. And we're going to talk more about that too. I feel bad too. I have a hard time using my voice at times due to not wanting to hurt someone. Absolutely. And so all of these things are real. And I'm sure as we read them, we even resonate with some of the things that are being stated. So let's get curious. Now that you're starting to identify some of the tall tale signs for you and maybe starting to know when a boundary is being crossed, I want you to think of a recent boundary that you allowed to be crossed. And now get curious with why you may have allowed that boundary to be crossed. With my previous example with the house guest, I later realized that I allowed that boundary to be crossed because in some ways I felt I had to protect my house guests. This is somebody who it was their first time in Ghana. Here I am as someone who had lived here for many years. They ended up in a peculiar situation, like I need to protect them. I felt so oddly responsible for her well-being, even though I had never met her until the day she showed up with my house with her belongings. I also felt like I would disappoint our mutual friend by pointing out the situation and by stating my boundary was being crossed. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I realized that I actually wanted to avoid all conflict. There was definitely something there to be learned. But when you notice a boundary of your own is being crossed, just begin to ask yourself, ooh, what happened there? So if you notice only after a boundary of yours has been crossed, ooh, why am I feeling this way? What's happening inside of me? Really go inside and explore why you allowed that boundary to be crossed. Why weren't you able to articulate anything in the moment? Why did you, or why do you feel as if you can't find your voice in that moment? Again, just be curious. Just start to see what comes up as you start to dive deeper into why this is happening. Don't get angry or upset with yourself because we're being curious. We're looking to see what shows up. What's the storyline? What do we hear? Avoid calling yourself names or inducing any type of shame. What you're doing right now is not shameful, it's practical. You're starting to find the chain of reaction. You're starting to put together the links so that you actually know how to stop what's been happening. So really dive in and see why you felt like you couldn't speak up for yourself. And grant yourself this permission to explore so that you start to combat the fear that's sometimes associated with expressing your boundaries. Remember, communicating your boundaries is a gift. It is a beautiful way to let the world know how to love you. Allow your curiosity to be a learning tool that encourages you to share this gift. Now, as you're getting curious, you may start to notice that, oh, well, that used to be a boundary, but I don't think that's a boundary anymore. Maybe I'm not looking at this boundary thing the right way. Actually, you are. Now, while I wish I could say that boundaries remain the same and they never change, that is completely not the case. A boundary you have today may change in a year. It may change in 6 months. It could even change in 2 weeks. You will introduce new boundaries and you'll move past other ones. And this is in part due just to the natural shifts that we experience in life. So think about it. If you're currently in a shift and you're going from being single to navigating partnership, there are some boundaries you probably had as a single person that can't exist as you are in partnership with someone. If you've gone from not having children to now having children, and that includes nieces and nephews, there are probably some boundaries around childcare, children, screen time, snacking that has probably changed when you didn't have children compared to now having children or nieces and nephews or even grandchildren. Also, we see boundary shifting when we have aging parents. As our parents start to age, we start to take on the provider role. We start to take on the caregiver role, and we start to teach them in a very different way. So boundaries that you maybe once had of, oh, I can't talk back to my parents. Well, now you have to talk back to them because you have to get them to agree to go see the doctor, to do the blood work, to make sure they have their checkups, to eat the right way. So our boundaries are constantly shifting depending on how life is unfolding. And the beauty of all of this is that boundaries do not have to be explained or justified. So you do not have to start out by communicating any boundary by being like, well, I know a year ago things looked like this for me, and today, da, da, da. You don't have to do any of that at all. You just get to offer your boundary. So begin to manage your boundaries. And the next time someone comes and asks you for something, know that it's okay to say no. You can even practice it. I'm not interested in that today. I actually don't have time for that this week. Thank you so much for the invitation, but this time I won't be able to make it. Or maybe you need to lean into the yes, because for some of us, our most immediate response to everything is no. Nope, no way, no thanks. Maybe another time. Maybe you need to lean into the yes. Yeah, that sounds fun. I think I can do that with you. I would love to go and have that coffee that you find that you always ask me for. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can sign up for the dating app and commit to being on it for 3 months. Identify your yeses and your nos and start to just really understand where the boundaries are and grant yourself the permission to express the boundary. I promise you this, life will give you ample opportunities to explore your boundaries. A lot of opportunities to explore your boundaries. So now we're going to move into a practice. And so odds are something has come to mind for you in an area or two that you could probably do better or use some help with setting more concrete boundaries. So today we're going to practice exactly that. We're going to take a look at what it means to, first and foremost, identify a boundary. So how do you even know you have a weak ass boundary? Because we want to create some badass boundaries. Well, if you don't know how to identify a boundary, if you don't know how to feel into your boundaries, and sometimes this happens because our boundaries are crossed over and over and over again, that the way we protect ourselves is just to disidentify with them completely. And so what I want you to do is start to actually listen to your body. When something happened or something has happened, because you can also track how something made you feel, just the mere memory of something can take you back in your body to seeing what the response is. So what's happening in your body? If I say to you right now, oh, I want to go and get a cup of ice cold water and throw it in your face, just like that. Odds are I hit a boundary. But instead of just saying, no way, Erica, you can't do that, actually pause and see what you feel. Is your heart racing? Are your hands clenched? Do you feel tension in your shoulders? Maybe your face is becoming flush and hot. Maybe you feel like, ooh, I thought this webinar was a good idea, but Erica's a little aggressive. I think I'm going to sign off now. Just start to really track and feel what's happening in your body. Your body will be a clear indication that somebody is likely pushing up against a boundary. Now, maybe that isn't the case for you. Maybe you don't really feel in your body as much, or maybe it's hard to pause in the moments because it feels like things happen so quickly. Another way to notice if somebody is pushing up against your boundary is, are you quick to offer a remedy or a solution? Well, I don't really, Erica, I don't really know if I can pay your mortgage for the month, but like maybe I could like buy you dinner this week instead. Like, do you need a meal? Da, 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 da. Odds are, if you are moving to the space of offering a remedy or moving to the space of offering a solution, the person has pushed against a boundary. You're uncomfortable. There's a reason you're uncomfortable. And instead of disappointing that person or maybe doing something you feel makes them unhappy, you're trying to make a concession. That is a sign that somewhere a boundary was likely hit on. Pay attention to those moments. what you're probably doing is minimizing the fact that the boundary actually exists. And last but not least, ask yourself, am I comfortable? Does that request make me comfortable? Do I want to leave? Am I unsure? Do I feel like I need to ask somebody else if they would be comfortable or uncomfortable with that? If you're uncomfortable with anything stated to you, asked of you, or being required of you, that is a clear sign that a boundary has been hit. Pay attention to it, go inside, track and see what's happening for you. Another way of knowing is, do you quickly respond if somebody says, hey, can you do this? And you're like, yeah, I can do that. I can absolutely do that. I always want to help you. Don't respond immediately. Actually allow yourself to track, hear, and understand what is being asked of you before you respond, so you can know if this is something that you actually want to lean into and do, or if a boundary is being hit. So now we're going to move into the exercise, because I want you to take time to understand your boundaries. And there could be a couple of things that are already at the top of your mind. So we're going to work through them. And so what I want you to do is just, again, make sure you have your notebook and pen or your laptop, or just really think through these things. And if you're in a space right now where you can't write anything down, just go through this process with me mentally. And once you can, go and write these things down. Once you start registering your boundaries, you're actually able to start communicating them to the world. So the first thing I want you to do is just think about, what is a personal boundary in your life? What is something that you want? What is a boundary that you would like to create in your personal life? So an example of this could be saying no to some social events. Maybe you go out all the time, or maybe you're invited to so many things and you need to start saying no to some social events. That could be a boundary that you want to create. Or maybe you want to limit contact with toxic people. Maybe you have a job where you're constantly having to be in communication with people and reach out to people, and you've decided, you know what, in my personal life, I'm going to have some boundaries. I want to limit interactions with toxic people. I get to decide. So just go ahead and write down one personal boundary that comes to mind. Now, underneath that, I want you to write down up to 3 things that you believe are current hurdles to creating that boundary. So if your personal boundary was saying no to social events, maybe a hurdle is, well, they're mostly family events, and I can't get out of the family event. Or maybe another hurdle is, well, that's where most of my business takes place. And so if I'm not there, I might be, infringing on my opportunities to create new business. Think about, what are these hurdles that you think are there, or not even think, are actually there? What are some of the hurdles? And now I want you to create a goal or a technique to help you achieve, maintain, keep, or start implementing this boundary. So for example, I'm going to intentionally schedule me time. 1 weekend a month, I am not going to go to any social activities. That is going to be Erica time. So the second weekend of every month is just time for myself. Anything that comes up during that weekend, I will say no to. And I will let people know, oh, I see you're having this event on that weekend. That's actually my weekend that I reserved to myself. So I'm not going to be able to make it, but I hope it goes really well. So just think about, what is it that you can do? All right. Now, you might still be writing, and that's okay. Keep the thoughts going. And now I'm going to have us jump into your professional life. What's a boundary in your professional life that you would like to create? Do you need to manage your workload? Do you need to set some limits on your availability? It's just something you would like to see change. Now go ahead and write down up to 3 hurdles, up to 3 things that may be keeping you from being able to hold that boundary. I work in a fast-paced environment. Things change all the time. I have to be accessible. It's what's expected of me. I know I'm on vacation, but like, I don't want them to think that I'm never available. So what are those hurdles that you face? And now let's think of a tool or a technique that would help you maintain the desired boundary. Do you need to prioritize tasks? Use out of office reply? One thing I used to do is after any meeting that was more than 90 minutes, I would set a 10-minute meeting slot on my calendar, and I would tell myself to just go outside, walk around for 10 minutes, take in fresh air, and then go back to work. And that was a way that I couldn't have a back-to-back meeting after such a long meeting. And it worked really well for me because it gave me time to process what had happened and then come back to what I needed to do. So as you're working through this and really thinking about what boundaries you want to set, what the hurdles are, and a technique or tool you can use, I want you to also just don't shy away from the small boundaries, right? It's so easy to look at the big monster boundaries around you. But the small ones are also being crossed, and they're also really important because they add up and they can actually be the most damaging because they are the ones that people tend to cross over and over and over and over again. And they're also the ones that we keep saying, it's okay, it's okay. Like, I'll figure it out. I'll tell them later next time. Oh, it's just not that big of a deal. But once it happens again and again and again, you feel it. Your relationship with those people start to change. So think about even some of the smaller boundaries that might be taking place. And by now you might be wondering, well, why are we writing down these perceived hurdles? Well, we're writing down these perceived hurdles because one of those hurdles just may be another boundary. It may even show you who's crossing your boundary the most. If a perceived hurdle is linked to an individual, that might be an indication that you need to have a conversation with that person in order to set healthy boundaries within that area. Now, the last area we're going to dive into is the romantic area. So state a boundary that you like to create romantically. And for those of you that are currently single, think of a boundary that you would like to create when dating. And if you're in a place where you don't feel like, no, I don't really want to date, well, think about a boundary that you would like to see around appreciating yourself more and getting to know yourself more. So maybe some boundaries romantically could be communicating your needs, as in when you have them, not shying away from them and are expecting somebody to read your mind. Maybe another need is defining your relationship expectations. And now write down the hurdles. And here, some of the hurdles might be fierce, and that's okay. Write it down. And now think of what is a goal that you can create? what is a tool or technique that you can use to help you actualize this boundary? Do you need to have regular check-ins with a partner? Do you need to prioritize date night with yourself? See what feels good and right for you. So I have a couple that I work with, and when they find themselves in a really heated argument where they're both yelling and they're not listening to each other, they're just extremely activated. One of them will say at some point, whoever remembers to say it first, it seems like all the adults have left the room. And once that comment is made, they have an agreement to pause the conversation and to walk away so that they can understand what's really happening inside of them in that moment. And then to come back to the table at an agreed time to have a more productive and loving conversation where they can speak to what is going on inside of them. And so I think that's a really beautiful boundary for a couple to have, that, hey, when we say this phrase, we have an agreement that this phrase means stop, pause, everybody walk away. It doesn't mean the conversation gets to continue. It doesn't mean that your feelings matter more than mine. No, it means all the adults have left the room. We are not having a productive conversation. Let's go, calm down, feel, and understand what's happening inside of us, and then come back from a place where we can actually hear one another and talk. And so maybe you need a boundary like that on your romantic sphere. So it's also just food for thought, something for you to think about. And now that you have that list, I want to give you these 7 steps to help you create really beautiful, badass boundaries. And we've talked about them through this webinar. So just start to pay attention to what's happening inside of your body. If you remember other boundaries that have been crossed and it's like, oh, that really didn't feel good. What happened in your body? Track it. The reason you want to do this is because if you notice your fists are clenched, or if you notice your fingers are moving or your toes are tapping, you'll start to notice, oh, hey, my hands are clenched. Oh, I'm grabbing my knees. And you'll start to realize, I think a boundary was crossed. And so now you're likely to recognize that boundary in the moment and not have to think back on, oh, the boundary is crossed, because now you're tracking what's happening inside of your body. You've taken the time to just slow down and go inside. When you do that, you're actually allowing yourself to feel the boundary. And this is where we want to get curious again. Like, whew, I can feel my heart racing. Okay, something just happened. This is usually a sign that someone has pushed a boundary. Now, what boundary was pushed and why? All right. Whew. Okay, I thought they were like asking way too much of me than what I could give. And yeah, I don't want to give that right now. I actually don't have the capacity for that right now. I can't take on another speaking engagement. I have to say no. Which leads right to the next point of being able to identify your limits. You'll start to really know and understand what makes you comfortable versus what stresses you out. Just start to track, even looking at what you wrote down, what within those perceived hurdles make you really uncomfortable? What stresses you out? And you start to understand why you have a need around your boundary, why there's a value to your boundary, why it matters so much for you. And then you'll be able to more clearly articulate that. And as you are being clear, you also want to be concise. You want to avoid story. You don't need to go all the way around the bush and down the street and come back. Just be clear on, hey, actually, I don't think I can do that for you this week. I think by next week, Wednesday would be better for me. Or just actually, hey, I can't do that at all for you. And you want to be clear, because when you're not clear, that opens up conversation for more questions. So if somebody asks you, hey, do you think you can volunteer at my event? Do you think you can volunteer at my event on Saturday? And you say, oh, I don't think this Saturday would work, but maybe next time. And they'll say, okay, well, actually, I have another one in 2 weeks. Can you do that one? when deep down, you just don't want to volunteer at the event. There's a boundary for you that your Saturdays are protected and they're for you and your spouse to connect. And so if you had said, hey, actually Saturdays are a time for me and my spouse, I don't actually commit to social engagements, they can't come back and say, well, what about in 2 weeks? So take the time to understand how you can respond and speak truly, clearly, concisely to what your boundaries really are. Stay consistent. Reinforce your boundaries regularly. This helps other people to understand what your limits are and to know what your boundaries really are. It allows them also to know how they can show up for you and how to love you, how to respect you. Follow through with consequences if it's necessary. For example, if you're dating online and you have a communication boundary that you have stated to another person, like, hey, communication as I'm getting to know you is really important. And they've asked you on a date, but it's been 5 days and you haven't heard from them, cancel the date. Let them know, hey, I know we're supposed to go on a date tomorrow. It's been 5 days since I heard from you. I told you communication is really important for me. It doesn't feel like we're aligned. Thank you. Bye-bye. Be clear on what your boundaries are and don't be afraid to state them clearly. You must recharge. Sometimes protecting our boundaries, stating them over and over again, getting to know what our boundaries are when we find ourselves in new situations can feel depleting. You want to make sure that you're able to practice self-care. You have to recharge somehow. Maybe that's through meditation, journaling, bringing your inner child to the forefront, color, dance in the rain, sing, just do anything that makes you feel alive. And as if you can release anything that's created stress inside of your body. And you want to do this without any guilt, because you want to make sure that you're honoring who you are. You're honoring your needs. And last, but certainly not least, seek support. Setting boundaries and maintaining them can be really hard, especially if you are someone who is used to having your boundaries crossed all the time. Reach out to friends who you think have really good boundaries or even family members. And if you need additional support, you can reach out to me or any other coach to help you get your boundaries on track. Join support groups, join communities that will help you also articulate your boundaries. Don't be ashamed to go out and get the help that you need. And so I really want to open the floor right now and just hear what are some of your takeaways or your reflections from today's session as it pertains to how you can start identifying, feeling, connecting to, and honoring your boundaries. You can either come off mute to say that, or you can drop it in the chat, but I'm really curious to see how today's information is resonating with you.
I'll come off mute.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing that I learned and heard very clearly is being clear when stating your boundaries. I think sometimes for me, I will say a partial boundary and not follow through, and then I get follow-up questions. So that's something that I really want to work on, just being clear the first time.
Thank you, Kirsten. Anybody else, either in the chat or feel free again to come off mute. Just want to see how this has landed.
Can I speak?
Yes, Sosina.
Oh, okay, Susanna, yeah, thank you. What resonated was consistency. I have a difficult time being consistent with boundaries. When I set them, turns out very well, but then I'll have moments where consistency leaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one. I second that. I echo that. And I see there's a comment in the chat. The session really reiterated a lot of the thoughts I have about boundaries and gave me new tools to use. Thank you for the session and insights. Awesome. Thank you. And if there are any questions, feel free to also drop those in the chat. And I am more than happy to answer them. Yes, Perlin.
Yes, I think I've learned to be more intentional about recognizing when a boundary has been crossed or is being crossed, and identifying it early rather than waiting till it's late and feelings have been hurt. So thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that, Perlin. And maybe I'll ask just one more time if there's anybody else who wants to share. I want to make sure that anyone who wants to share has an opportunity to do so. Okay, so today's takeaways are few, but I want to make sure that you get them. So remember, your boundaries are a gift to this world. When you don't speak them, you don't actually allow people to have a deeper connection with you or to have increased intimacy with you. Your boundaries are dynamic and they can change. And change in a boundary doesn't mean something bad. It can often mean that you have increased trust and that you feel safer with the person that you're also engaging with. And last but not least, always remain curious when a boundary is being crossed. Hey, what's going on inside of me? What am I feeling right now? Why is this happening? Ah, okay, yeah, that's right. I remember the last time something like this happened, how it made me feel. I don't want to feel like that again. I don't want to feel like I gave up more than I needed to. Yeah, I think I need to say something. I think I need to make sure that it's clear what my boundary on this is. And even if something happened and some time has passed, know that you can go back and you can still articulate your boundary. So don't feel that you have to remain silent. So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an incredible journey, and you are now well on your way to setting some badass boundaries. Thank you for your time and participating in today's webinar. If you enjoyed today's session, know that this recording will be sent to you in the next few days. Share it. Share it with someone that you feel needs this information so that they too can benefit. And then the two of you can actually become boundary warriors together. If you also have enjoyed my style and are wondering ways that you can work with me, you can always reach out to me. And I am going to have an upcoming virtual workshop, a 5-week long workshop on unleashing your inner child that will be available. It's going to be 1,000 Ghana cedis or $100 for the entire 5-week program. If you're interested, just shoot me an email. And so that is the conclusion of today's program. I'm so grateful for your time and for you joining me today. Thank you so, so, so much. And if there's any other feedback or anything else you would like for me to know, just shoot me a note. I am here and ready for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.